Everybody for coming here, and there's the actual title from the film, and this is a exploitation trailer that was made by the person sitting to my right here, Joel Sanderson, who you will hear a lot about during this.
The movie never had an official release, so I just made a trailer and did it. I used to manage a drive-in, so I did it in that kind of style of like exploitation to play it up. So
anyway, here it is.
During World War II, members of the French resistance were caught in a struggle for survival, where mission failure was not an option. Fighting against superior forces in the forest of France, they must survive alone on a mission to a remote bridge in occupied territory to stop a German transport at all costs. The shortest straw. Never before has a motion picture captured the adventure, the terror, or the absurdity of war. The Shortest Straw, starring Jane Robertson and Rex Mahan. Who will pick the shortest straw?
Okay, so regional cinemas, the basic definition. It's localized independent cinema made outside of mainstream media systems. That's pretty much the standard definition everyone would have. Usually with lower budgets, of course, and local talent both in front and behind the camera. Sometimes some kind of names are brought in to try to help with distribution or funding, but generally it's local talent. Because of that, often spotty distribution, and that's the issue now, of course, with all the digital stuff we can do, you can make a pretty professional film, but who's going to see it? It's harder. That's the harder aspect of it. Traditionally, the regional cinemas are exploitation films or genres, easier again to sell or find an audience if you say you're doing a romantic comedy or a Western or whatever. And because of the distribution and because of the regional aspect, they're usually, if they come out at all, lost and forgotten. And of course now there's a big emphasis that you can see in things involving lost media and people trying to document it. And so this is all sort of part of that aspect. A quick rundown on some notable Kansas regional cinema. Some of these you probably know about. Certainly I would hope you know about Carnival of Souls, since it comes from here. And this is not an extensive list, and of course it only picks up in 62. I would assume there's lots of stuff before that at different points, particularly in the 50s, once people had access to video and people working at TV stations might have done some things. So Beast from the Beginning of Time is an example of that. It was done by people working at a TV station in Wichita. The Shortest Straw is the one we're going to talk about. Ride the Hot Wind, a biker exploitation film done out of Dodge, which was on streaming services recently and is now available in Blu-ray. Why, I don't know, but it is. My Name is Legend is probably a lost Western also made out of Dodge. King Kung Fu, a nice family comedy made out of Wichita. So awesome, in fact, that it did not get released for 11 years, I think, after it was made. But it is about to have a big high-definition Blu-ray restored whatever release as well. Song of the Sword is sort of a barbarian film. Night Screams is the film that just played at Tallgrass in the producer-director's preferred edit, which is shorter than the known version, and it's coming out, or is out, on a 3-disc set of DVD and Blu-ray and a documentary that's longer than the film itself, and all sorts of other deluxe things for just a teen slasher movie. Darkness, as you see, a vampire zombie splatterfest film, which is soon to get a big fancy release as well. And the filmmaker, Leif Jonker, worked with Tim Burton on Mars Attacks, and he's one of the people I proposed that we could bring here to talk about his work, possibly. My Day in the Barrel, coming-of-age film. The guy who made it, Jason Bailey, now is a film critic in L.A. He's published books on Woody Allen, Quentin Tarantino, and others. And a couple of his other films turns up on independent film lists as being notable. The Dead Can't Dance, this guy who made this could also possibly come here to speak, maybe in partnership with Indigenous Studies or something like that, since it is a Native American zombie comedy. And a film shot in the Cowtown, the sort of touristy old Wichita, Western Noir, came out a while back. But anyway, there's tons and tons of others. So the goals that, for me, and not everybody would agree, that I want to recapture the best as we can of the filmmaker's actual vision. So no changes or improvements. I want it to, as it was. It's sort of a museum piece, let's say. And we may not know exactly what they did, and it might be a mistake. They might have been incompetent or whatever. But I wouldn't say that's our choice to think about. You never know. You might have had a budding Jean-Luc Godard who was doing something, and we think they messed up the soundtrack, but it was intentional, right? Like Godard would do, or whatever. So you're trying to recover the actual history, so it needs to be documented, not just the film itself, but the process, which is part of what I want to rush through today. And then, of course, after that, rather than just let it fall off the map again, you want to archive it, you want to safekeep it for the future, and make it available for people to see in the future. So there's, of course, an image capture from the film there. Anyway, okay, one of the filmmakers, Randall Parker, he was an art instructor and illustrator. He became an actor, commercial photographer. He moved into industrial filmmaking at Boeing and some of the other aircraft factories. And he made the first Pizza Hut commercial in 1965. It won a bunch of awards. And the first national Pizza Hut commercial, I should say. But you can find it online in a bad print. It's a clever little commercial, and Parker himself appears in it.
Putt, putt, to the Pizza Hut. Putt, to the Pizza Hut. Putt, 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 putt.
Parker traveled the country in a van that was equipped to mix sound and do video editing. The other filmmaker was Jeff Husson, producer, director, became a media mogul. There's the names of two of his companies. He did a lot of television in Great Britain and ended up his career. By the time I tracked him down, he was just retiring and finished up his career in New Zealand. So they met, Parker and Husson met as in the acting group at the Wichita Community Theater, and that was one of the hubs of the local art scene at the time. And they both came up with scripts when they decided to make a film. As soon as Husson read Parker's, he told me that he decided to do Parker's script because he thought it was better. The son of the director of the community theater, Lee Woodward, invested $12,500 in the film. I heard different stories. Some said they expected the budget to be $15,000 total, and others said this was supposed to be half, that Woodward was putting up half of a $25,000 budget. I haven't been able to get anything definitive on that. Parker scouted the locations, finalized it, and in summer, over 2 to 2.5 weeks, they actually shot the film. They couldn't afford color. They were going to use synchronized sound, but both cameras they had made arrangements to use with synchronized sound capabilities. The deals fell through, so they had to shoot it silent and dub in the sound later. During post-production, Parker and Husson had a fallout over it. Husson wanted to just do the straightforward story, just what's on the surface. Parker had some idea that he was doing, a deep, meaningful, existential script that would discuss the absurdity of life and war and all of that, and Husson didn't quite see it. Husson also thought he could maybe market a TV version that would fit an hour-long TV slot, 55 minutes or a little less, or perhaps if someone was having a double bill or a triple bill at a drive-in, they could squeeze a 55-minute version in. It didn't work out that way. The Husson edit debuted at Wichita State University campus in the theater that was the acting and theater classes. So that's where it had its debut. If you'll notice, right below that, the tragedy that hit. The screening was supposed to be like at 8 o'clock or something. They kept waiting and waiting to start it because the leading man was supposed to attend and he didn't show up, and they didn't know why. So finally, after half an hour, they went ahead and started the film, only to find out he had been in a motorcycle wreck on his way to the premiere, and he died from his injuries less than a week later. So a big tragedy for that. The leading lady and the director, producer, got married, and they tried to market the film on the East Coast to drive-in organizations out of Chicago and somewhere in Texas. They tried to market it on the East Coast. They took it to England, and he tried to market it there, but they could not get anybody interested in it. I mean, it was black and white. Most films were color by then. It didn't fit, swinging London in the late 60s or any of this kind of stuff. They just couldn't find a fit for it, unfortunately. Husson gave all of the footage and everything else they had back to the main producer, that Lee Woodward. And he and his wife went on to their careers. Parker got the footage and edited his version, which about a year later, he played on the Wichita State University campus at a new theater that had been built. It was part of a film festival hosted by a Wichita Film Society member and professor on campus who taught the most popular film class at Wichita State for decades, a guy by the name of Jim Erickson. And the avant-garde filmmaker Stan Brakhage was in attendance, speaking about experimental film and showing his latest work, and an up-and-coming new director who had not quite yet made a name for himself, but had done one major Hollywood film, Finian's Rainbow. Francis Ford Coppola was in attendance talking about the future of cinema in the United States. This is before Coppola, this is like 3 years before The Godfather, before his script for Patton had been made, and before his script for The Great Gatsby or anything like that. So pretty cool that the film played, as part of this film festival. Parker then tried to market this. What he would do for part of his career with that traveling van of equipment and everything, he would spend part of the year mapping out where he was going to go, contacting local people in different cities across the Midwest and planning to go there and make commercials for them. And so when he planned that, he tried to also plan ahead, and he contacted TV stations and tried to buy broadcast time, which then he wanted to broadcast the shortest straw, and of course he would contact people to sell commercial time to make his money back, but he couldn't do it. It didn't work either. In 1971, he shot what he hoped would be a prologue, or what he sometimes told me was his alternate opening for this, but he never finished it. He never mixed in the sound with the image and actually finished it. But based on what he had told me, and actually what was barely possible with the footage and sound that he had, Joel edited a 3-minute or so prologue to complete it for him, and we debuted that when we showed the debut of the restoration this last January. Parker showed the film several times in Wichita after that. A lot of this was connected to the Wichita Film Society, so it was sort of a linchpin for this. There's Roger Ebert's statement when he was shown the Wichita Film Society schedule in 1981. We were showing a film that he wrote, so he jokingly told us what great foresight and we had to show his films. And then he was shocked to see that we were having a Andrei Tarkovsky festival with 5 Tarkovsky films. And he said, I've traveled all around the world. I'm a well-known film critic, and I see films all the time. And I've only seen 3 Tarkovsky films in my life, and you guys are showing 5? And I said, well, if it helps you feel better, we're probably going to lose our shirts on this. So anyway, it was quite a little film group for years. It was written up in Films in Review in the 1950s, where the other things that were written up were like the Museum of Modern Art or something, so that the Wichita Film Society was in that. I started researching as sort of a back burner project, the history of the Film Society, and I spent several years just slowly working at it, tracked down a lot of people. One of the cool things that connects to this was Montage Productions, headed by Wayne Sourbeer. It was a bunch of filmmakers in Wichita who wanted to make short experimental films, and they made a series of them. I managed to track down Wayne Sourbeer, get prints of the films. They were scanned in by a friend of mine at the time. Later, I wrote a little piece about the history that I had uncovered as part of my plans to do a Film Society history. And Joel improved some of the scans that had been done years before, and we put them on archive.org, is it? .org? Yeah. And it was seen by people at Eastman House who contacted Sourbeer not long before he died, got better prints and scanned them in using the stuff I wrote. They shot the archivist introducing the films, and you can go to Eastman House online and see good prints of these Montage Productions now. And I contacted the guy and said it would have been nice to get credit, but at least they exist. This also led me to contacting Bruce Conner, who came from Wichita, and of course the famous artist who also did experimental films. And it's also how I met Randall Parker through all of that. And that is a joke. We did not really show London After Midnight, a famous lost film, by the way. We showed the film that is long lost. So when I finally contacted Jeff Husson, I said, are you the Jeff Husson that did this thing? He said, how in the living hell do you know about this film? I have the world's only known print. And I said, no, you don't. I have Randy Parker's print. And then his question was, how in the hell did Randy Parker have a print? Because he didn't know. So I filled him in on that. A theater in downtown Wichita, which had been an old vaudeville house and went through a lot of changes, started showing classic films and foreign films in the late 70s, and I became a projectionist there, replacing Joel Sanderson, who was a projectionist there before me. And that's how I met Randall Parker, who wanted to do a screening of The Shortest Straw there, and that's how I found out all about that stuff. Then sort of became a friendly acquaintance of Parker for off and on and saw him many, many times. There's the bridge where this takes place. Joel and I were just there this last Saturday to see what it looks like now. It does not look this good now. There's some stills from it. When we had the screening, it was a good idea. We thought to make some stuff for people, and we made some, the leading lady attended the screening of the restored version, and so had these photos for her to sign for anybody who was there, little collectibles for people. The film's really interesting. It is obviously influenced by a lot of the film trends of the time. It's got sort of a anachronistic music score. She breaks the fourth wall. There's a fantasy sequence where people are wearing 1967 clothes, and it's supposed to be set in 1943 in France or something. So it tries to do a lot of things. Doesn't always succeed, but it makes an attempt. The music is by the Surfs, and I'll talk about them in a minute. And these two performers, we didn't know they were going to before, but they showed up at the screening that we had. So it was great to see that. And a couple other images. There's Jane in the fantasy sequence as Joan of Arc, and that's her at a Q&A after the first screening. So that's how she is now. She's like 82. I think she's had a long career as a successful actress. She was part of Second City. She's in Pepsi commercials in the 70s, things like that. So she did pretty well. And the person there is Tim McGill, who's sort of a property master and lots of other things, who's been part of almost every independent thing in Wichita since 1965 or so, I think. Well, there's Jane at the screen, as you can see, with one of those pictures, ready to sign things. Randall Parker died in 2006. I didn't live in Wichita anymore, and everybody thought somebody else would have told me, so I didn't know for a while. And eventually his partner for the last 25 years of his life, I tracked her down, And we went through his films. It took us a while because they were all scattered and things weren't labeled, but eventually we found his copy of The Shortest Straw and his commercials and some of his experimental films and other things. Once I saw the film, which was the first time I'd seen it since 1986, I then realized that Parker didn't direct it. I thought he had, actually, in my memory. And then I tracked down Jeff Husson, and we did the restoration. I was looking for Jane and eventually found her, and she just happened to be in Wichita after not having been in Wichita for decades. And so she was able to attend it. We contacted the Tallgrass people who thought it might be fun to show it. They said, well, maybe not part of the actual festival, but we have a venue in Wichita where we show films on stuff all the time throughout the year. So we showed it 2 days at the end of January. And it was the debut of the restoration plus the new prologue. And the director, Jeff Husson, who gave us the okay for all of this and was kept apprised of stuff and did long, extensive interviews with me about it, died about a month after the screening. So at least he lived long enough for that. That was Jane's comment when I finally got in touch with her. Okay, so a quick overview. Here's a poster Joel made for the event too, by the way. So I got the stuff from Nancy Wright. We got the okay to do it. And Justin Carey, who's a guy that has a company that does this sort of thing, scanned it in for us. Well, the cool thing was that was a nice fortuitous quid pro quo. There's a hipster bar across the street from Wichita State called Kirby's, and Parker used to go there and shoot footage at Kirby's on Halloween. All the hipsters came out in fancy costumes, and he would shoot every year, and then the next year he would show them the footage he had shot the year before. So there was like a decade's or more worth of this, and someone decided to do a documentary about Kirby's. And they found out eventually that I had the footage of Kirby's that Parker had shot, etc. And again, through Joel's contacts, we were able to make a quid pro quo that they could have access to the Kirby's footage that I had if they would scan in The Shortest Straw at 2K for us. So they did. So we didn't have to pay money for it, which we didn't have. That was good.
It's a really small bar.
Yes, it's pretty
It's
small.
right across from the school, yes.
Yeah, and I played that in the early 90s. It's like the smallest stage ever.
Well, I played
Yeah.
it in the early 80s.
Yeah.
So I beat you by a decade. And in fact, the stand-up comic Sinbad was my opening act. I always used to joke about that. No, he had other places to go. I didn't. Yeah, he was starting his stand-up career getting out of the Air Force, so he had other places to go that night, and I didn't, so he went first. But that's jokingly say he's my opening act. Okay, the technical specs. It was obviously was created into 2K digital on a Blackmagic Cintel using DaVinci Resolve. The result was a audiovisual file of about 239 gigabytes. It was slightly cleaned as it was scanned. I don't think they did much of that, but they did a little. And you can adjust the sound. You can do the equalizing a little bit, and you can do a little bit with contrast when you scan it in. And Justin did a little bit of that, but most of the work was then done on Final Cut Pro by Mr. Sanderson, and there's some of the specs on that, approximate work. It was, if it was a full-time job, it probably would have spent about a month or so of work on that, so 160 hours or so.
Yeah, the print wasn't properly stored, and they used tape splices, so the tape splices had shrunk, and that's why the splice corrections, because since they shrunk, a slight flash of light occurs, and since I've worked as a projectionist, I can see all that stuff go by, and it was just driving me nuts, so I finally just went back in and fixed it.
There were fantasy sequences, and they had told me, the filmmakers both had told me they shot that on different film stock and wanted it to look different other than just the fact that it was clearly a fantasy sequence. So the decision was made to go ahead and tint it sepia. There were reasons for that I won't bore you with, but that's what we did. And then, of course, again, Joel did what could be done with the prologue to put that in. We gave ourselves credits, so we added some credits, and Joel put some music under that, and the trailer was created. Now, the last footnote to the footnote, this is the last bit here. The music, as I said, is an anachronistic soundtrack for the film, and it's done by a group called the Surfs. They recorded their first professional single in 1965, but an album came out late in 69. It was produced by the same producer who'd been producing Eric Burdon and the Animals, and Bob Dylan, and lots of others. So it was a major label. Right about the time that they were recording that, Jimi Hendrix saw them and invited them over to his home studio. So Mike Finnegan, the keyboardist, co-lead vocalist for the Surfs, and a couple of the Surfs members came and jammed with him all night. And that jam was cut by Hendrix into 2 different parts, and they are 2 different numbers on his Electric Ladyland album. Then a jazz guitarist of some note, Jerry Hahn, had a quartet, and Mike Finnegan joined it, and the album they recorded has 10 cuts on it, and 7 cuts of them are written by a member of the Surfs. So they sort of had a big impact on that. Lane Tietkin was that person. He became a well-known folk and blues artist in the San Francisco area. And Mike Finnegan became a sideman of incredible note through the 70s and 80s. He's on Cher's albums, he's on Ringo's albums, he's on tons of everybody's albums. He had a few albums out himself. He had a charting hit in the late 70s. And et cetera, et cetera. So
He's a KU grad.
yes, and so if any, and the Surfs used to play Wichita and Lawrence and lots of other places too, but they were staples at the time throughout the '60s, mid to late '60s. So what do we want now? Well, we'd like to try to get some more screenings for it. Who knows? Maybe somebody somewhere might want to stream it. I mean, if some of those other films are making it, maybe this could. There are lots of small label places that put out things on physical release. Got a few on the list to see, but eventually, of course, as I said, just archive it somehow and make it available for people in the future so it is not lost media. And so perhaps here's 3 of the main places we might check with all the materials: the print, the materials for the prologue, the research that I've got, my notes, the article I wrote about it, etc. would be donated, so that the film is there and exists. And if we did manage to get some small company to put it out on a physical release, we'd get those. Let's pretend it was DVD. We'd get a bunch of those and donate them to regional libraries and study centers, so they exist out there somehow for the people in the public. So you can also just increase the potential visibility and hopefully survival rate for the thing. But if there are any questions, be glad to, or comments, related or not, I'd be glad to deal with them. If I can't, Joel can. And there's my email, so if anybody has any other questions later, and that's all from me. There's a Facebook page for The Shortest Straw that has a test render, it has stills, it has other stuff, it has some stuff on it, it has the trailer and some things. Although I guess if you went to Facebook and just searched The Shortest Straw, would it turn up?
Yeah, it should, yes.
Cool. So how is lost cinema, how does that differ from orphan films? Or is it the same?
I guess they overlap quite a bit. If you did the diagram, there'd be a big shaded middle where they're the same thing, I suppose. I guess the difference would be, well, the orphan sort of sounds, maybe there is no difference nowadays.
I don't know.
That's the short answer.
Are there any other famously missing films from Kansas that are kind of the holy grail?
I would think the one on the, for me, the one is that Western.
Yeah.
My Name is Legend. It's done by the same people that did that one that is now out on Blu-ray, the biker exploitation film Ride the Hot Wind. Ride the Hot Wind. Don't ride the cool wind. Mm-hmm. Ride the hot wind, right? And it is apparently a Western version of Agatha Christie's
10 Little Engines?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Yes, I was trying to think of the other name. There's so many names for that. Like the Renee Clare movie was And Then There Were None.
Right.
So it's the Agatha Christie version of Western of And Then There Were None. And it stars Tommy Kirk,
Oh,
the
really?
old Disney kid, who's also the star of Ride the Hot Wind. He plays a Lieutenant William Calley type character who's been shamed by stuff in Vietnam, and he comes back to start a new life and gets involved with a biker gang. But anyway, so that apparently that had mob money behind it, and it played a few drive-ins. It played Wichita, it played Texas and some other places, and then the mob wanted their money, and some lawyers took it over and took it away from the filmmaker Duke Kelly, who's also the co-star. And it's the story we heard was that it sat in the lawyer's office for years, and then kind of the only known print, and then kind of disappeared. So it may be out there somewhere, or it may have just been put in a dumpster. And that's the one I'd kind of like to see. I applaud the fact that they didn't try to do just a horror film or something. It's not there's anything wrong with all that stuff, but they tried to do something a lot different. I think Parker's script, he tried to do too much. And I can readily see why Husson tried to, just make it as straightforward and not have all the existential meaning woven into it. Husson told me if he had to do it over again, of course he would correct some technical things that he wasn't adept at the first time he ever tried to direct. But he said he'd probably make a movie somewhere in between his short version and Parker's longer version, that he thinks a 70-minute movie might have been the best way to go.
So
And
did you have access to both scripts?
don't have access to the scripts, just the two films, and then long conversations with what they said, which who knows how their memories were. And Jane likes the fantasy stuff, which is stuff that personally I think just doesn't work. I know what they were trying to do, I just don't think it worked. And I think it's part of that, again, they were part of Wichita's artistic community in acting and music and film and painting and sculpture and whatever. Parker did sculptures and other things too. So the fact that parts of the film, it has the jump cuts, it has sight lines that are off, it has Brechtian disruptions, not just a comic commentary to the camera and break the fourth wall, but it has those other Brechtian kind of distancing things that fit Parker's idea of existential absurdity. He has there's like a running gag where the setup is in the prologue that now exists, and the payoff is 70 minutes later. I mean, that's a long time between setup and payoff for a joke.
The reason why the prologue was necessary is because the whole thing's about that truck you see in the trailer. That's what they're after. They're sent out to blow up the bridge as the truck crosses. You don't know why till the end. Without the prologue, it doesn't explain it. They just go out and you're not really sure what they're doing. But the prologue shows the truck in advance. It introduces characters in advance. So it was necessary to recompile that. And all we got was a roll of footage. And there was a mag track with the sound, and we just had to go through and figure out, make up an order for it.
It sets up the joke. It sets up the existential theme, and it sets up the plot of the film. So it does a whole lot in those 3 minutes, and I can see why Parker needed it. But they have a conversation about existentialism. There's some other things in it. One German character says like everything is possible, everything is absurd, everything is, so it's woven in there. It just doesn't always pay off as well as it might. But I still think it's a great little film. I mean, it's not Citizen Kane or Rashomon, but I would encourage you to go to the Eastman House and look at those montage films, because they're actually really good. They're art films about art. And Corbin Lepel, a famous painter, is the focus of one. Charles Plymell, one of the noted beats, the guy that came up with the Wichita Vortex thing that Allen Ginsberg then used, is the focus of the second film. There's cool stuff. I did an homage film to it that Joel did the music for, which is not part of the original series, but just something we did. Anyway, the original series, which you can see in great prints at Eastman House, is well worth seeing. They're little 10-minute films, like 4 or 5 of them. So
this was such a fascinating presentation. Thank you, Ben, and thank you both.
thank you.